Hey guys, welcome back to Gothman's Epic Stuff. A lot of people hit me up about the Dune box, this guy right here that I did, and I really, really love this box. I'm very, very happy with it. But somebody hit me up and was really interested in me making another one, and I figured, well, this is my baby here, but I guess I could part ways with it and then buy another one and try again. So I decided to do so. So this PLA, I mean, you can hear that. That is solid. This thing is rock solid. I feel comfortable mailing this, so this will be going to a new home. I'm actually really sad to see it leave because I was really proud of this prop. But I took my chances with a file that's been floating around out there made by somebody, which is supposed to be a little bit more accurate. In a lot of ways, it is, and in some ways, it's not, but it's a great file. It is out there in the world, but I don't have a 3D printer. So I worked with Fourth Horseman props on Etsy. That's fourth, past tense. Fourth Horseman, actually descriptive, I should say. Fourth Horseman props, and they do Elegoo resin printing. And these things come out flimsy as all fucking hell when you do resin print. And it was a bitch to ship this out. But I gotta tell you, this would have been true of anybody who was working with this prop. And Fourth Horseman prop, Joe worked with me. He was really great to work with. I'm going to use him for a lot of my resin printing in the future just because his customer service is outstanding and his communication is just great. So if you're looking for somebody to do some prints for you and you want somebody who will do right by you, check them out. They're really cool. Fourth Horseman props on Etsy. Great 3D prints. He also sent me a Gom Jabbar, which I'm going to paint up, and I'm really excited to add to my display. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys what I did with this on this, and you're going to see how this looks in a time-lapse video of me painting it. I've never done one before. Hopefully it's useful to you. I will narrate over it and let you know what's going on. But yeah, let's check it out. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our thing on a Lazy Susan, and that's actually going to allow us to spin the item around so that we don't have to move around to paint it, and it'll help you align brush strokes. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take three distinct and different styles of green, and I'm going to drop it onto my palette, and then I'm just going to cover this with a base coat. The reason I don't mix them super well is because I want the varied colors to marble. And so it doesn't really matter how precise this is when you're doing this phase, and you don't even have to get total coverage over the black because a lot of washes and things and layers are going to go over this. So the goal here is to just marble out and get paint on the item, and then you can kind of go in and swirl or blotch or things like that and further your marbling a little bit later. But essentially having a variance in the colors of green is going to give you some depth that's going to be under all the other colors. So what I do is I go around and I paint the top, the front, the back, the side, and the other side. And then I'm going to put the thing on my hand and do underneath. Now, I'm kind of dry brushing this in a way, so I'm not really going to be needing... Well, I'm really not going to be needing a heat gun to dry this off, but if you want to do this quickly, you can have a heat gun ready and go ahead and just sort of blast it so that it dries out a little bit. Now, downside, if you have a resin prop like this is, don't heat blast it too often because it'll get wobbly on you. That's the downside to these resin prints. I must say it was a lot easier to work with the PLA print that I had. So, we went in, we did our base coat, and now while everything's still damp, I'm going in and I'm taking a sponge brush with black acrylic, and I'm just going in and I'm stamping a bunch of the corners and stuff to kind of just go in where the paint accumulated and it's overly green in the corners. And I'm just sort of getting that the hell out of the way. And so that way it's going to give me a little bit of gunk in the corners that's black instead of super green. Next, I have my printout, and it's time to start color coding the panels on the top. So I take in a little bit of this mustardy yellow and the greens, and I look at my reference, which I did show, and then now I'm just going to go in and start generously putting some paint on. And I picked a brush that's roughly the diameter of the panels. It's not the end of the world. If it's not, you can go one smaller. Try not to use one that's bigger. It'll make your life more miserable. And so I'm going in, I'm doing all the mustard yellow parts, and like I said, we're going to go over this so many times. Don't worry about it. If it's not precise, you can do touch-ups later. You're just trying to get yourself set up. And what I like to do is I like the brush strokes for the vertical pieces to be vertical and the horizontal pieces to be horizontal, so all the brush strokes aren't going the same way. So it does look like mosaic tile. So I'm going in and using different levels of variance. I'm just going to go in and paint all this stuff, the mustard, and get that in there. Then I'm going to rinse that brush off, dry it, and go in. And while the brush is still a little wet, I'm going to go in and clean it up just a little bit and sort of blend. Then I'm going to go starting with some greens. So I'm going to take a little bit of this sort of aqua blue metallic and mix it in with a different green. And I'm really just going to go in and paint some lighter bits. And so the base coat will serve as the predominant color, where you're going in and you're lightening some areas and you're just creating some yellows and you're varying it up. And then I know it's going to sound really stupid, but once I put all this detail down, we're going to sponge off so much of it. And we're going to blend a lot of it so that we get really like an innuendo of this color variance. It's I know it's going to sound so stupid. The other thing I decided was I really like this green that I mixed. So what I started doing is going in with this brush and doing some dry brushing over the raised edges of the piece because I wanted this color to permeate throughout the whole piece. So now I'm going back in and again doing more and more, a little bit more mixing, a little bit more varying, and I'm just kind of trying to match my printout color-wise as best I can before I go in with all the blacks. So again, going through, taking my sponge, covering this time instead of black acrylic, we're using shoe polish, and the reason we're doing that is this is going to blend and darken up a lot of this stuff and creep into the recesses. And it's going to help me blend this and make this a lot more subtle and less dense. And so the problem was I should have probably blasted it with a heat gun first because it's just a little too subdued. What I ended up losing was the highlights, and that was a little irritating for me. So while I was letting that dry, I didn't realize I had lost so much of it. So now I went on to the sides, and again, I'm just putting some variance in. We don't really have a good reference for this in the movie, so I'm just kind of doing it in general, and then I'm going to coat over that whole thing and paint over it with a washed out green. And after I did that, I realized that I should have just heat sealed it, which I didn't, and dried it, so that was stupid. So I'm trying to do it again, and I'm going to make the same mistake twice, and then realize that I'm an idiot. And what I'm ultimately going to do is give up on the varying, and I'm just going to go in, paint over the whole thing, wipe it with the brush and with the towel in one direction, and then I'm just going to do highlights. I'm just going to sort of do highlight brushing. And so what I'm really doing is just sort of trying to mute what I did because I wasn't happy with it. So I went in with the shoe polish and damped up the paint so I could take a lot of the paint back off. So now you can see a lot of that paint is off, and now both sides match. So now I won't screw it up in the future. So what I did decide that I wanted to do was take a really nasty chip brush and get some of that mustard color and some of that really awful house green that I have, and do some scratches and cracks and stuff. And so I call it my eyelash brush because that's what it looks like. But chip brush is really good for this. And then I dampen it, and then I blend it a little bit with the sponge. And that sort of makes it very, very subtle, but it does add some nicks and scratches and things like that. And it just gives it a little bit more character. And now what I'm doing is I'm doing the same thing to the top. And again, we're going to blend. And now I'm taking acrylic black, and I'm doing the same scratch technique up top because it is extremely dirty on the top of it. So I'm going in and using that. And again, I'm blending it with a sponge brush and just kind of creating a little bit of history on it. Now it's time to take a very big dry brush, take a very light green, like a very bright colored green, and it's time to airbrush highlights. And so very, very dry, very, very new, almost like a makeup brush. And this is going to catch everything. So what I do is I'll go diagonal, and then I will go top to bottom and left to right. And that covers all your angles, and that'll catch all the edges. And it just brightens it up. And because the base coat is so heavy, it'll blend into the base coat and give you a very nice look. And as you can see, that is the look that I went with. I decided not to vary the sides so much with the tile. The back of this is not a very attractive back because it does have some errors from the print plate, but it's still not too bad. And so what it does is it does give you that sort of depth, and I go in and do the front a little bit. But the money is the top. So the bottom, I just did a very, very generic dry brushing because no one's ever going to see the bottom anyway, but I did want it to just sort of have a consistency.
You do get some variance. Version 1, which I explained, I've turned essentially this flat box into this. And version 2 has a little bit more of the character in this resin print. And so we get just a little bit more of it. Either way, the technique is pretty much the same. Figure out how you want to do your base coat. Go in, paint underneath some variants, then go ahead and dry brush over it with a lighter green. And that's all she wrote. Dab away what you don't want. Black wash at the end. One more light, soft brush over it again with highlights.